Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine Van Ness, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst for K-12 Education here at the National Governors Association. Welcome to NGA's webinar on strategies for parent, family, student, and community engagement with K-12 schools. This webinar will highlight research on parent and educator opinions and share strategies for improving engagement between families, students, community members, and their K-12 schools. You can find our earlier webinars in the Reflect and Redesign series on NGA's website, which discuss state education budgets, re-engaging students, summer learning and enrichment, and supporting students with unique needs. Be on the lookout for forthcoming webinars on community schools, student well-being, and more. Today, I am pleased to engage in conversation with three national experts on a very important topic. Henderson is a senior consultant at the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement and is co-author of the book Beyond the Bake Sale, The Essential Guide to Family School Partnerships. And she has a new book coming out soon. Reyna Hernandez is the Senior Director of Research and Policy at the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, the first membership association with the goal of advancing high-impact policies and practices for family, school, and community engagement to promote child development and improve student achievement. And Wendy Lopez is the Vice President of Content and Partnerships at Learning Heroes, supporting the vision that equipping parents to best support their children's educational and developmental success will lead children to excel in school and lead lives of opportunity. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion because we know this is an incredibly timely topic. A recent NGA Policy Academy that included a bipartisan cohort of 6 states working to improve student and school staff well-being identified family engagement as a major focus area across states. So I want to jump right in, and I'll turn to you first. Please tell us about the major findings in terms of the impact of family engagement. Why is this important for students, families, and school leaders alike?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm delighted to be here and in such good company. I have been tracking the research on family engagement and student achievement since 1981. And my new book, which I'll tell you about in a little later, is actually the 5th in the series that I've done on the research. The Beyond the Bake Sale book was a response to people saying, we know it's important, but we don't know how to do it. So I had to also look at the research on good practice as well as on effects. And the big overall story from all of these years of tracking the research is that engaging families is an essential strategy for school improvement. It's just as important as teacher quality, as strong instructional leadership, as good curriculum supports and professional development, and as a positive child-centered school climate. And when all 5 of those things are in place, schools really tend to take off and improve. And if even one of them is missing, the progress slows down. And so family engagement, or as some of the studies call it, strong ties to families and community, is vital because it improves morale, it changes the school culture, it motivates students. Teachers benefit from this because they learn about what's important to the children in their classroom from the parents, whom then teachers recognize, wow, parents are experts on their kids, their culture, their community. We need to be working with them, not blaming them if kids aren't doing well. And then the second big story is that we need to be using high impact strategies to engage families. The traditional things we do, parent-teacher conferences, back to school nights, curriculum nights, and student performances, those are all nice things to do, but they're lower impact. And the big reason they are is that they don't necessarily, and they're not designed to build trust. And that is the key thing. And I know Wendy's going to talk about the importance of trust and the findings that Learning Heroes has come up with when they survey parents, teachers, and principals. And I'll let her dig into what the universal agreement is on that topic, but just to say that to build trust, we have to talk to each other with respect. We have to listen. We have to honor people's contributions and backgrounds and welcome what they have to offer us. And when we do that, everything else becomes easier, because trust is the soil in which everything else takes root. And we're not going to have trust if we don't work with and honor and respect the families whose children attend our schools. So that's big story number 2, high impact strategies. And we can dig down a little bit into the early childhood field, where there's a lot of research on this. And I know this is a K-12 webinar, but of course, all that leads up to children coming into kindergarten well prepared is a huge predictor of future success in school. So when we start early, engaging families in ways that help them understand how our school system works, how to connect to teachers, what to do to support their kids at home, and to how to navigate this incredibly complicated school system that we have, the better kids do, the longer they stay in school, the more likely they are to graduate and go on to higher education, and the less likely they are to get in trouble and to drop out. So we have to bear that in mind, that we can't not do this. And then the third big story is there are powerful ripple effects of engaging families. So if we do reach out to families, welcome them in, help them understand what their kids are learning and doing in class, and build collaborative partnerships between parents and teachers, this not only improves student achievement, it also strengthens families. When we welcome them and help build their confidence and their understanding how important they are to their children's learning and education, they tend to go back to school themselves. They tend to start seeking out employment. They become more confident in talking to teachers and being part of the school community in ways that can really make the school a better place for their kids. But the ripple effects don't stop there, because studies on teacher retention, which I know is a hot topic right now, show that schools that have high family engagement are schools teachers tend to want to stay in. Elaine Allensworth did a wonderful study called The Schools Teachers Leave. And they leave schools that are not collaborative and inclusive and democratic, that don't value their voices, that don't engage families, that those schools have toxic climates and teachers want out. So when we're thinking about that, it's a tremendous benefit to teachers to have close relationships with families. It gives them information about their students they can use to motivate them and differentiate their instruction, and build parent support at home to reinforce what kids are learning in school, so teachers become more confident and effective. And then for administrators, having a school culture that is collaborative and is trusting allows them to build a highly effective, well-functioning team to turn a school around and really make it soar. So I'm going to throw this to Reyna, because NAFSCI is doing a lot to promote this in many ways and to build the competence of teachers and administrators to do this kind of work well. So Reyna, take it away. Do you have a particular question for her, Catherine?
Sure, I'll just jump in and thank you, Anne. It's really clear that these practices not only benefit students and families, but as you say, ripple out to their teachers and school environments and greater community impacts. So this is obviously, as you say, something that needs to happen. And so Reyna, looking at some of the key levers for states to best engage families in their children's education, how can states support districts in these efforts to engage families?
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this webinar. At NAPSCI, we really think that governor's offices can do a lot to create the conditions that support effective family and community engagement. When I was an assistant superintendent at the Illinois State Board of Education, we had coordinated very closely with the governor's office there that hosted a P20 council that had a family and community engagement committee. They had also developed a governor's interagency council that was working to create an ecosystem that was really family centered, that wrapped around children, youth, and families, from education to human services to health. I mean, we really recognize these things aren't independent of each other. And there's a lot of talk now about like whole child frameworks and trying to address the social emotional learning and mental health of children, families, teachers, right, especially after the pandemic. So thinking about that coordination. We've done a lot of state level work and really thinking about those conditions. We had developed a framework for states to use called the Opportunity Canvas that really recommended focusing on 4 areas. So I think that governor's offices can think about their internal infrastructure for family engagement as an agent, as a state, think about its capacity, its collaboration, its communication, and its culture. So, when you look internally, is there staffing intended to be focused on thinking about the experience families are having and to connect those resources to really tie together, a thread that cuts across every aspect of education, whether it's special education, bilingual education, early childhood. A lot of times those are multiple systems and they cut across more than one agency, not only education agencies. So thinking about the coordination of services that cut across all of those areas through coordinating councils, P20 councils, hosting family cabinets, things like that. Having regular and ongoing external engagement of stakeholders. So thinking about the platforms that bring the voices of diverse families and their perspectives into state level decision-making, like family cabinets. I think having a voice and really messaging as leaders in a state about their own expectation, because leaders foster a culture. And so being able to speak to these values when they're going out there speaking, and how they communicate with the public at large, with families about what's happening, having family-friendly websites and social media and all of that. The second big area that we're thinking about is program administration. So, how can governor's offices really look at how family engagement fits into their state and federal requirements and for different funded programs that provide whole child, whole family support? And how are they calling it out as a priority? Even when it's just that like one requirement within something much bigger. They can direct their senior leaders to look at those programs from soup to nuts, thinking from an application to the monitoring to the reporting and the supports for each of those programs. The third area is thinking about school improvement systems. We know in education, there's been a lot of investment in those areas. Governors can begin by setting improvement expectations that value family and community engagement. A lot of times there's a requirement for some sort of like an improvement team that includes a parent, maybe a community member, and it's not real, rich, authentic engagement. So thinking about how family engagement fits into those improvement frameworks that usually have indicators and things like that, thinking about training of coaches, school improvement services, accountability systems. We have some states that actually built family and community engagement and climate surveys into their state framework for improvement, into their state report cards. The last big area is thinking about professional capacity initiatives. This work doesn't just happen, it goes beyond caring. As Anne was talking about, trust and relationships with families are a foundation, but that's just the beginning of the work. And that's not easy. Establishing trust, especially there may be some communities where there are already reasons for mistrust. And so this is something that teachers over and over, survey after survey, teachers say, yes, it's needed, but I wasn't prepared for this. This wasn't part of my training. This wasn't really covered when I was learning how to become an educator. So directing agencies that oversee recruitment, preparation, licensing of teachers, administrators, and others to look at their professional standards, their preparation requirements, and the evaluation of educators, and really thinking about how they build that engagement into their professional practice. Every state offers conferences and, professional development sessions. Oftentimes family and community engagement isn't really a part of that, and it needs to be. This goes beyond caring. We need to better prepare and support educators to be able to do this work.
Absolutely. And I really love the examples of the cross-agency collaboration that can center parent and family engagement in our policy academy with those 6 states that I mentioned earlier. Alongside family engagement, cross-agency coordination and communication was another key theme that all of the states were interested in improving on. So those examples that really tie both of those things together are really helpful. And certainly a place where governor's offices can lead. So Wendy, taking it from the state level down to the ground level a little bit, what are some key takeaways from Learning Heroes surveys of parents, teachers, principals? It seems to me like keeping students' success and well-being at the center of these conversations seems to be really important on all sides, but I would love to hear more from you about your work in this area.
Yeah, and thank you, Catherine, for inviting us. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. I will build on what Ann and Reyna, spoke to, and begin with the promising news, as you just alluded to, and that is that parents and educators really are unified in their belief in that addressing pandemic impacted learning, we need to work together. 89% say it is essential for parents and teachers to work closely together. And moving even deeper, we asked parents, teachers, and principals what was most important as it relates to school and home communication. And there is also alignment. So what rose to the top for all 3 is building trust with families and making sure families have a clear picture of how their child is progressing academically. We know, no surprise for all of us as parents, parents prioritize, and in this order, safety, social emotional well-being, and making progress on academics. And so shifting gears, to where we are, really laser focused at Learning Heroes, despite this alignment, despite the front row seat that parents have had over the past couple of years, this system is still not set up to support parents and teachers working together. And we really are leaving parents in the dark. So for those who have been following Learning Heroes, we have been tracking over the past several years and have consistently found in our nationally representative annual survey that 9 in 10 parents, 92%, regardless of race, income, or education, believes their child is at or above grade level in math and reading. And we've been probing on this, and what we've really seen is that this disconnect really does in part stem because parents rely on classroom grades. They believe those grades mean grade level mastery. As high as 84% this year reported their child was getting B's or better. And we know from teachers that they're very, quick to share that those grades mean effort, often even more than mastery. And in fact, they believe that parents rely too much on grades alone. So in our latest survey, we continue to want to probe and make the research really actionable. And what we saw is, in doing a split sample, is that 92% of parents who believe their child is on grade level drops to 44% when you share with parents 3 things. One, you say, we shared with parents, your child received a B in math. Secondly, though, their state test results indicated below grade level in math. And then third, their benchmark tests at the beginning of the year indicated that your child was below grade level. Those 3 measures together moved that again down to 44%. And it also really seemed to compel parents to want to take action. So the vast majority said that they would talk to their child, that they would proactively speak to their teacher about co-creating a learning plan. So for us, this really speaks to, again, the foundation of trust building as critical. And then, as Reyna was saying, this is not just about care, this is about actionable and culturally responsive communication and sharing what we know, right? So without overwhelming parents, sharing multiple measures in ways that are concrete and that are actionable. And it's not just about posting, all of our data on portals either, but really breaking down the why and the how we're using these multiple measures to, again, just bring parents and teachers together, because we really do need both working together. So a couple of just examples of where this is happening. We're working with the Colorado Education Initiative in supporting their Future Ready Families work. And as part of that, they just released a wonderful new tool called Understanding Assessments for Families. And it's essentially to help them navigate the various assessments that their children are taking throughout the year, and an opportunity to provide feedback, right? Understanding, again, how and why they're being used. Another quick example, we've been working with Two Rivers Charter School and Flamboyant in DC to customize and pilot our parent-teacher planning tool, which is designed to strengthen existing touch points like parent-teacher conferences. As Anne mentioned, it sort of keeps me up at night that we've consistently seen that parent-teacher conferences are the #1 way that parents and teachers communicate, and yet they fall so low for both parties in terms of value, right? So the purpose of this tool is to be to intentionally support those existing moments, and beginning with starting parents and students for their observations, for their inputs, for their priorities, and then moving along to sharing multiple measures beyond classroom grades in ways that are very concrete. So breaking down, if you're using MAP growth or MClass, what does that mean alongside grades and classwork examples? And then finally, the third step of the tool is to, again, building on parent-teacher observations and that two-way conversation, along with the multiple measures of data, co-creating a learning plan that is really focused and takes into consideration what parents may already be doing to help, really move students forward with grade level learning and the social and emotional piece as well, which is part of everything. The other example is that same tool, the parent-teacher planning tool, last year was customized to support the Texas HB 4545 legislation, which is really all about creating accelerated learning plans for all students who didn't pass the STAR exam. And so these are just a couple of examples. We know that these kinds of meaningful two-way exchanges are taking place in some places, but not everywhere, and certainly not for all families. And some just to begin to wrap up, a couple of final data points that we really think we want to see the numbers change on is, in our most recent survey, only 19% of teachers said that they would consider parent observations as it relates to determining progress. We think that number should be higher. Again, parents are the experts of their children, and they have observed so much over the past couple of years. Only half of parents this past year said that, less than half said that their teacher had worked with them on creating a plan to address any learning loss. So all of this just speaks again to the need to support those existing touch points, add value to them as we are looking to further partner with families. And then finally, building on what Reyna was saying around the teacher piece, for us, this is not about blaming or shaming teachers. We know teachers need and want more support in this area. In fact, only 28% rated themselves as excellent in helping parents feel valued or heard. And that's an element that teachers themselves report is critical for building trust. The majority of teachers say it's not easy to communicate difficult information. And it's really no wonder when we know that they say that they need more time, they need more support, more training around these areas. And then finally, just to close again with a bit of promising news, but for us, an area that we're really thinking a lot about is that we tested several statements around equity with parents, teachers, and principals, and they all agree, right, that that equity is so necessary, right, that all children deserve and need the opportunity to have what they need to learn and grow. And yet, all three also said that staff need more support to address their own bias as it relates to communicating with family. So as we think around family engagement as an engine for equity, that wanted to just sort of close with that there really does need to be more support and focus on, again, building that trust and that teamwork.
Well, Wendy, that was so interesting. And all the approaches that you're using, the tools you're developing coincide beautifully with the recent research on what is effective, what works, what's high impact. All of these tools are so needed in the field. It's such a great contribution that you're making.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, our goal is really just to support the great work that's already happening, right? And hopefully making the research really actionable.
That's the big thing, making the research actionable in ways that seem doable.
Yes.
Yeah, Wendy, thank you so much for that window into what parents and teachers are telling you they want for their children in schools, what they need more support in, and to get right into half of that equation. And what are some effective strategies you've seen to support teachers in this family engagement work? And then what are some of the barriers you've seen, and how might we encourage states to work, or schools and districts to work to overcome those barriers?
One of the most effective strategies for building trust, addressing biases, developing closer relationships, and collaboration is the parent-teacher home visit program, which I know the Flamboyant Foundation, Wendy, you're working with them, has sponsored here in the DC public schools, Washington, DC public schools, and elsewhere. And some of the best new research we have is about the effects of this program, because it's not a home inspection, and it's not what I call an information dump, and it's not aimed at fixing parents. It's aimed at building trust and a working relationship between teachers and families. And teachers only go where parents have said, yes, please come. They go in pairs. They go generally during daylight hours. There's never, to my knowledge, been an incident. When teachers come to meet with families in their neighborhoods, people pay attention to that. Wow, the school cares enough about us that they're coming and seeing who we really are and where we live and talking to us. And teachers say it's the best professional development they've ever gotten, because for the first time, they're out of their classroom, they're out of the power center that can intimidate families, and seeing who their kids in their classroom really are, and who's the family behind that child, and then developing a relationship with them. They share their contact information, text message, contacts and all of that, but mostly they listen. The idea is to ask the family what their hopes and dreams are for their child. What is their child good at? What does their child love to do? And what does their child struggle with? Is their child shy? Is their child have, sort of a math phobia? Do they love soft, fuzzy things? What is it? And this gives teachers really actionable information to use in their classroom. So when I talk to teachers who've made home visits, they say, I know so much more about my students. I know how to motivate them. I know how to, capture their interest. And so attendance goes up, and all of the things that go along with that, generally, reading scores, math scores. But a fascinating thing that happens is the school culture changes, because first of all, parents start to come much more into the school for school events and so on, because the school has come to them and they know that they can trust that when they walk through that door, somebody isn't going to say, what are you doing here? Why are you here? They're going to feel like the school is a place for them. And then because teachers have revised drastically their expectations of students and their expectations of families, there's just much more camaraderie that goes on in the school. And so attendance as a whole goes up, even for students who haven't yet gotten a home visit. So that, I think, any approach like that, where teachers and parents are sharing information, listening to each other, really has a powerful impact on the school as a whole. That's that ripple effect that I was talking about. And it also energizes the community, because when parents build their confidence to come into the school building and to speak up about what's on their mind and to suggest things that might make things better, and start to take part in, task forces and committees, or going to events and various kinds, they're building their social networks and their social capital. It's healthy for the civic culture of a community. And so that ripple effect goes on beyond the school. But what the big barrier is, and Reyna and Wendy both touched on this, is that teachers aren't prepared to do this. Teachers say the number one area where they feel least well prepared is working with families. They don't get it when they're training to become teachers, and it's not included in their professional development. And what we need to do is really be systemic, integrated, and sustained about this, and bake family engagement into everything that we do. So if we want to improve reading, how can families be engaged in that? If we're worried about math scores or dropout rates or college attendance or transitions from one level of schooling to the next, families need to be part of that planning. They have wonderful advice that they give. And it's so interesting to me because it always coincides with what the research says is high impact practice.
Yeah, it's wonderful to remember that schools are not an island. They are part of a community, and they are attended by children and supported by parents in a community. And so while family engagement can improve the culture of a school, it can also improve community relations at large as well, which is a wonderful ripple effect.
When my coworkers and I were discussing with our publisher, Scholastic, on our new book, we said, the thing about this is it has all of these positive ripple effects, and teachers do better, schools get more effective, community culture changes, families are strengthened, kids do better. It's like everyone wins. And our publisher said, that's your title. And so that's the name of our new book, Everyone Wins: The Evidence for Family School Partnerships and Implications for Practice.
I love that. I love that. So Wendy, can you expand a little bit on the research that has just come from Learning Heroes around building that trust, whether schools do that through building relationships with families or building that welcoming environment? What does that look like? And is there a state role in helping to foster that environment within schools as well? Are there tools that schools or teachers are looking for in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just say, and I absolutely love that title. I got into family engagement as a teacher in the South Bronx, and it was doing home visits that I saw my own story of my family and my students' families. It absolutely made me a better teacher. And it was what led me to, I said, this is what I want to do. And really, so thank you for sharing that. And I love that title. Yeah, so just to build on some of the points that Anne was sharing, it's interesting. A lot of what we focus on at Learning Heroes in our qualitative work, especially, is honing in on language, right? What resonates for families and educators. And so we asked parents, teachers, and principals to select the terms that resonated most in terms of their goals for family engagement. And for all three, trust and teamwork rose to the top, even above terms like partnership or collaboration. And for us, that really speaks to, in the qualitative, we asked them to describe why. And they said, things like, because it is a give and take, right? And I think that speaks to some of the things that Anne was sharing. And yet we know that the reality is that most parent-teacher interactions are short, they're infrequent, and they are negative, right? So parents are still saying that they most often get calls when something bad has happened, right? And so that leaves schools with, sometimes even with well-intentions, fail because there isn't that focus on authentic, as Anne said, and Reyna mentioned earlier, trust building. So as a starting point, we really think that it's beliefs matter, right? So do we genuinely believe in and value families? Do we acknowledge what they are already doing? And an example of that is we've seen that many educators, size 73%, believe that some families are not interested in supporting their child's education. And yet we see also that, and consistently, that the majority of Black and Latino parents report it is absolutely essential or very important for their child to go to college. And this is consistently higher by as much as 10 to 15 points than their white parent peers, right? So we know that Black and brown families care deeply about education. And so we really need to push in dispelling that belief that those parents don't care, and won't show up. So in terms of your question, absolutely. And Reyna touched on this earlier so well, that there is a role for states to play in terms of creating the policy and the infrastructure to integrate and sustain family engagement. In terms of resources, we're really excited. Dr. Yael Bergman, who's the co-author on the Dual Capacity Framework version 2 with Dr. Mapp. He's joined Learning Heroes last year as our senior vice president, and he recently authored what we think is a really actionable tool and are getting great feedback and eager for more. It's called Unlocking the How, and it's designing family engagement strategies that lead to school success. And so it offers a set of concrete recommendations as well as district and school examples around 3 main pillars: building trust as foundational, focusing on student learning and well-being, and then finally building the infrastructure to again sustain the work. And what's powerful is that it's really rooted in the 6 years of Learning Heroes surveys, along with all of the research behind the dual capacity building framework and lessons from the pandemic as well. So that's a resource that we're happy to share and point to. And in terms of the trust building part, it really does outline again some bright spots and case studies that are really integrating and making it part of their culture. A lot of the things that Anne mentioned, right? So prioritizing listening in both formal and informal ways to understand what matters to families, meeting parents where they are, as you mentioned, in terms of home visits and in the community. And then finally, those regular ongoing communication touch points. So we also really consistently see that teachers say that the best way that parents can know how their child is progressing is regular communication with the teacher. And yet there's just not time in the system to support that regular communication. So that is a real area where policy can be supportive.
Great, thank you. Some really great concrete examples, and I know folks will be able to read the Unlocking the How report and others that have been mentioned here to really dig in a little bit further as well. So Reyna, I'll turn to you. We have identified this as a critical need and something that can have really positive ripple effects across schools and families and communities. And this is a big issue to tackle and likely needs support from the state, local level. We also have recently seen a huge influx of federal funds for education. And I am wondering if you have some recommendations for how to use some of those funds with either short-term or long-term goals to kind of make some of these systemic changes that we've heard are greatly needed, and especially want to give you a chance to lift up any innovative models or state and district examples that you wanted to highlight for folks.
Absolutely. I think we always urge policymakers, administrators, there's so much work to be done here to really use their levers for change. To move these things. And you mentioned money, that's the first one that we talk about, funding, because it's always so critical, but that isn't the only lever, so just to always keep in mind, in some states, looking at their mandates, thinking about those requirements that are built in different places, and the how really matters. Family engagement isn't something that's a separate program or an after school thing or set aside. It's something that needs to be integrated, and it touches so many of the programs that are out there. But thinking about those, thinking about measuring and monitoring. So what kind of information the state is collecting, what kind of things monitors are looking for, like, are they even speaking to families when they go into the field to identify whether a program is doing well? And are they hearing about that experience, motivation. So incentives work great. And, if there are ways that governors can create a challenge fund or, something that is really trying to foster innovation, using messaging is so critical because, there's a bully pulpit. There is a strong voice coming out of a governor's office. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then marveling, we say, sharing those best practices, really elevating and holding up places that are doing great work. So, to speak a little more concretely, I really think that you mentioned spending recovery dollars, family and community engagement fits in this space. We actually put out, and participants will see in that resource list, a set of examples and a guide for state use of recovery dollars on family and community engagement that we had put together. In Massachusetts, for example, they're using recovery funds to supplement other state and federal family engagement initiatives that they have to push a state framework that they had developed through a separate project, but now they're supplementing that. We'll be hosting their first ever family engagement summit next month, leveraging that recovery money. The funding can really be a great resource right now to think about professional capacity building, especially because these funds are sort of point in time. They don't have the continuity of like other funding programs. This is a huge infrastructural investment, investing in staff capacity, which we've heard over and over is so critical. And so, we had put out a report, the State of the States report, which is also in the resources, that was a scan of professional standards. Wendy and Anne both spoke about how important relational trust is. Well, less than 40% of states even address the need for teachers to establish strong relationships and trust with families in their professional expectations. So there's a lot of work to do in that space. NAFSC's core competencies report that was just released and is also in the resources shares the 8 competencies that we found through research and looking at other standards, and all the work that we've done are really needed for family-facing professionals to reflect and connect, to build that relational trust, and then to collaborate and lead alongside families. Wendy also talked about the learning heroes, unlocking the how. Those types of resources can really inform professional standards and training programs that can be funded with these dollars. In November, we're going to be releasing an educator preparation framework that was developed through a consortium with 7 states. And each one of those teams included at least one ed prep partner and at least one state agency that has to do with the regulation or oversight of licensure, ed preparation. And those recommendations include things like building really rich experiences before educators even enter the classroom to connect with families, to connect with communities through service learning programs, through family as faculty programs, through creating these simulations, live simulations with families. There's just so much innovation in that space. I think the recovery opportunity can also be a time to think about establishing some of that family engagement infrastructure that we were talking about, whether it's establishing an office for family and community engagement or one of those family-centered coordination councils, thinking about establishing a family cabinet. We have a lot of states that have done that. From, North Dakota has a family cabinet. A number of states have these funded positions that are really helping to do that legwork. One of the resources that folks will see is a recommendation for a federal office of family and community engagement that includes examples from different states in there. And thinking about something like a statewide family engagement center. Right now, there are a number of federal family engagement centers. We'll include as a resource a report on those centers and their work. But states like Kansas have invested in their Kansas Parent Information and Resource Center for years, and it's been really, really successful.
Great. All of those are such actionable ideas, and it's always helpful to learn from how other states are approaching the work. So as we come close to the end of our time together today, I wanted to give each of you a chance to add in any final advice or recommendations that you have for governors seeking to improve family engagement, or call out, a key takeaway, something that you just want to really underline for folks as they leave us today. So I'll start with Wendy and kind of go backwards from our initial starting order.
Yeah, building on some of the points that Anne and Reyna shared, I would say three main takeaways for me. The first is just given the narrative right now and the negative news and headlines is to focus on where we are united and not divided. There's a very vocal minority of parents, right, who are really taking over those headlines, but we really believe that by and parents and educators are united in what they want and need from school. They believe family engagement and equity are essential for student success. They want that focus and that those candid conversations around progress and around social emotional learning. So we really feel like this is a critical point in time where governors have such an opportunity in states to help bring that narrative in bringing parents and teachers together. And the second would be building on what Reyna mentioned around, post-pandemic investments. We really think that there's an opportunity to see family engagement is front and center for all of those investments that are being made. And we fear that by leaving parents in the dark about their child's progress, that those investments, we're at risk of not really maximizing both parents and teachers in their unique roles. And then finally, for us, we actually called our most recent report Hidden in Plain Sight. And that's because, Reyna pointed to so many great examples, and so did Anne, that we've learned so much over many, many years, right? There are districts who are modeling this work and schools and states who are modeling this work. There are roadmaps and blueprints like the dual capacity framework and, the resources that Reyna mentions. And so really looking at what we've learned as a way forward.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Reyna, I'll turn it over to you next.
Sure. I'm going to piggyback on that because I think in addition to what we've spoken about, Wendy, you hit it right on the head. Right now, we're living in a moment where even though family engagement is a nonpartisan issue, families have really been politicized lately, and we're seeing it at the state level with laws and policies and things that really are driving a wedge and not, when at a time when we need to be coming together. And so, we at NAFSCE, we made a statement about really speaking about what family engagement is, and from our perspective, what it isn't, and what we're not about, and 17 other organizations signed on to that. We'll include that as a resource. But I think governors are, have a powerful voice and being proactive messengers about the importance of family engagement, not just as a nice to do, oh yeah, parent teacher conferences and open house, sort of once a quarter. No, we're talking about fostering a partnership, recognizing that no one can go it alone. This is about really supporting the work that everyone is doing to support student success, and really being able to create those expectations, starting from the governor and moving all the way through every agency that, that they oversee. And thinking about how to create equitable platforms for bringing family voices into those big state conversations, because not all families have access to that same, platform, the media, the ability to, sort of always yell the loudest. But it really is important for championing equity to create those equitable spaces. We had put out a report that we'll include in the resources on reframing the conversation, really speaking to how to message effectively about family and community engagement. Governor's offices can train their communications staff. Right now, there are Ohio, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Maryland are all hosting reframing academies to train state and local folks on really being effective communicators. Massachusetts is working on developing their cohort. So, just being powerful messengers, I think, is so essential.
Absolutely. And Anne, I'll turn it to you.
Wow, but there's not that much left for me to say because Wendy and Reyna have said, so much about what's important. I think I definitely underscore the need for governors to lead in a positive way, use their bully pulpit, build on the consensus we know is out there, and be sure to listen to all voices and not just get overrun by the vocal minority that has a narrow agenda, but really look at where do we all agree, and let's move on that because we need to do it. One example, I think, comes from Oakland, California. There's a wonderful book called The Way We Do School that we include in our Everyone Wins report. And Tony Smith, who was then the superintendent in Oakland, took 18 months to build real agreement and consensus and listening to the different communities that make up that city about what they wanted their schools to do and what kind of resources they needed to create communities that were wonderful places to raise children and where families could get the resources they needed to take advantage of opportunities that had been denied them. And that district since then has been through 5 superintendents, 2 state takeovers, but has made all of that, during all that turmoil, steady progress because it created a system of community schools. It's not a school system that has a community schools program. It's a system of community schools. And many of the studies we looked at said we need to make more investments in our needy communities to build social capital, to provide opportunities for families to get continuing education and other supports that they need, and basically to be a place of equitable opportunity. And I think that that's another very good approach for governors to consider is going the community schools route and integrating social services into the school offerings and related areas so that families feel that schools are there for them as well as for their kids, and that they're places of educational and economic opportunity for everybody. And I think a final thing is to look at your federal Title I program. That's an old program. It comes out of the civil rights movement and the war on poverty. We've sort of forgotten what it was all about after all these many years. But Title I requires that schools and districts spend at least 1% of their funding on family engagement. What the heck are your schools and communities doing with that money? Is it low impact or could it be higher impact? That's a source of funds that's right there and will continue to flow. So that might be good to take a look at that. And also to define what you mean by family engagement, really give your state agencies a good solid definition of what we mean by this. In Connecticut, their definition, which was developed by going out and talking to families and educators all over the state, is a full, equal, and equitable partnership to ensure student success. And then they develop guiding principles around that. And the state agencies have been grabbing onto that because it's just so helpful to them. We have a consistent definition and we have some guiding principles that we need to really bake into our system in a systemic, integrated, sustained way. And I'll put up in the resources, there will be a link to the Connecticut definition and framework with those guiding principles.
Great, thank you. Reyna, did you want to jump in?
I'll be sure to add the resources also. We had worked with over a dozen states developed definitions like this. So we'll include the links to those so that, they can see what that looked like across different states. If a state doesn't already have a way that it's talking consistently about family and community engagement, that's an absolute starting point.
And it's a great way to get people who work for the state out there talking to people at the grassroots and not just to each other and, you know, the usual suspects.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate these final notes to focus on where we are united and not divided, and using that bully pulpit and governor's leadership to bring everyone to the table around a shared definition and making sure that you are reaching out and using equitable platforms and systems to gather family input and feedback. And I especially appreciate that example from Oakland, California, where the system really adopted a community schools ethos and really centered community and family within their school environment and their school mission. So I'll put a plug in that our next webinar next month will focus, do a deep dive into the community schools model with some experts in that area. And I'm glad that it will help supplement the important work of family engagement in K-12 schools. So Anne, Reyna, and Wendy, thank you so much for sharing your insights today, your time and expertise with us. And thank you to those who have tuned in. And please do take a look at the webpage with this recording, with all of those reports and resources listed out. Dig into those great resources. And until next time, thank you for listening and have a great day.